There it is. A little message. And so with that being said, I would like to formally and very happily welcome you all to tonight's panel about the importance of pronouns, commemorating, celebrating, and marking this very exciting day, which is International Pronouns Day. So I will start by introducing myself, and then I will turn over to my fellow panelists to introduce themselves before we continue on with our introduction formalities. So Derrick, Carl, Biso here. I use they, them, theirs pronouns exclusively, and I am the outgoing president at Trans Wellness Ontario. I'll be moving into the role of volunteer coordinator, which I'm very excited about. And I currently am employed with QLink, which is a collaboration between Windsor Pride Fest and Windsor Pride Community and Family Services, offering programming to 2S LGBTQ+ youth. Feel free to check out their website, qlinkwe.ca, for more information. I'm happy to share that resource with the youth in your lives. I'd like to turn it over to Janet and then to Sydney.
Hi all, I'm Janet, and Derrick, if you wanted to put the link in the chat, feel free to do that as well. I'm the incoming president for Trans Wellness. I believe I said my pronouns are she, they. They're also on the screen in case you forget what they are. The other hat I kind of wear, since we're kind of talking about our roles, is I'm also a graduate student at the University of Windsor, where I do research on kind of gender euphoria, kind of trans wellness, that type of thing. So I'll pass this on to our other panelist tonight, Sydney.
Hi everyone, my name is Sydney. My pronouns are they, them, near, and I am the education coordinator, social media manager, and non-binary peer mentor here at Trans Wellness Ontario. And within my other roles, I am a University of Windsor student, Bachelor of Music with a minor in Women and Gender Studies. I'm in my 4th year. Really excited to be with you folks tonight. So we do want to start off with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenai, Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Huron-Wendat peoples. We know that land acknowledgements are not enough. We must collectively work to advance reparations from the harms caused by colonialism, including its legacy and ongoing mechanisms. We must also work to return unceded lands and territories, to restore a relationship of peace and friendship, and to honor the treaties and sacred balance with the land and planet Earth.
Thank you so much, Sydney. And I want to start by also sharing a link in sort of this opening formality for the organization, Trans Wellness Ontario, for anyone who has not yet gotten a chance to visit the website. There's a link there. And for those who are not familiar, Trans Wellness Ontario our mission is to enhance and sustain the health and wellness of transgender, genderqueer, two-spirit, non-binary, queer and questioning communities and their families. And tonight we are very happy and very excited to get to be here tonight to talk about the importance of pronouns, to celebrate pronouns, and to also get a chance to practice pronouns. What better time or what better day than to make time and space than on International Pronouns Day? And with that said, I'd actually like to turn it over to Janet to kind of open up this conversation, talking about what are pronouns, to kind of get us all in one mind when thinking about pronouns while we're together this evening.
Awesome, thank you so much. So yeah, as Derrick kind of just opened the floor with what kind of are pronouns? Well, pronouns are a really great way, to refer to someone without using their name. Pronouns are words, we use in place of people's names generally to identify them. So, instead of saying Janet repeatedly in a sentence, you might say Janet is going to school where she is going to do some work. And so they, them, theirs, she, her, hers, and he, him, his are common pronouns. And, other pronouns, which are often referred to as neopronouns like these, yours, are also becoming a lot more common and a lot more visible. And I think that's a really good thing. And pronouns can be used in speech to help reduce how often we say someone's name. Although, some people don't like pronouns very much and really just prefer that you use their name, and that's okay. The thing that we always kind of try to position here is that Respect people's identity and always ask if you're unsure. And so pronouns should never be assumed. We should take notice of pins or buttons or even tattoos in my case that someone may wear to, signal what pronouns they use. Or again, you can just ask. It's as easy to take a moment and say, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what are your pronouns? Or I want to ask instead of assume, but can you tell me what pronouns you use? It's also a really great idea to introduce yourself with your pronouns and model that behavior, kind of like we're doing here tonight. And it helps when asking to introduce your pronouns with your name. Again, just kind of like what we're doing here tonight. And it's really important that we ask each other what pronouns to use and to use those pronouns consistently. And if we make a mistake, to really correct ourselves and always do better to use the correct pronouns. And we'll talk about that a bit more shortly. And we also encourage everyone to always be exploring what pronouns feel right for you as an individual, and what is the best way to describe the way that you see yourself and understand yourself.
Thank you so much, Janet, for kind of opening the floor, this conversation about what are pronouns. And what we wanted to kind of start with for us as panelists was also to speak to kind of like our own pronouns and the bit of that personal journey, right? Or personal choices that we make and the feelings, the thinking around it. And I wanted to actually yield the floor to Sydney, if you'd like to start by kind of sharing why you use the pronouns you do and a bit about the story maybe on how you came to choose to use those pronouns.
Absolutely. So I first likely realized that I was non-binary when I was around 16 or 17, and initially started with using they, them pronouns because I thought that that was kind of the only option that there was for me to use. So I used they, them pronouns for several years, and it was okay. It wasn't completely right, but it felt better than she, her, or he, him felt. But there was still something that was not quite there. So in February of last year, 2020, I was just browsing through the internet, looking at some different types of pronouns, and I came across the pronouns nay, nem, near, because somebody had actually rewritten Alice in Wonderland using nay, nem pronouns. So I read through the first chapter of it, and it took a little bit of kind of reworking in my brain. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of strange, how does this work? But after reading through the chapter, I was like, okay, this makes sense. And then I went on this website that we're going to send to all of you and started practicing with using they, them pronouns to make sure I could get it right before I started asking other people. And the first time that people started using pronouns for me, COVID hit, so I wasn't really around people where pronouns would be used because mostly it was just one-on-one conversations. But when people started using my pronouns, when I started working for Trans Wellness, it's like, okay, this is right. And nay, nem really stuck out to me because the N specifically represents neutral, which just really resonates with my experience, much more than any other pronoun that I have encountered. And I've just found that, I like to think of it as, when somebody uses she, her, or he, him, it's like I'm laying on a bed of nails. It's really not comfortable. If somebody uses they, them, I'm on a couch, so it's okay. I don't mind it as much. But when somebody uses they, them pronouns, it's like I'm on a bed with the fluffiest blanket, surrounded by stuffed animals. It's just completely right for me. So I have chosen they, them pronouns and stuck with them ever since.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's a really nice analogy, actually, for kind of that feeling, right? That embodied feeling of when something feels right. Janet, could I ask if you wanted to share a bit about your own journey and why you use the pronouns she, her, and they, them?
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely talk about that. So kind of similar to Sydney, I started with they, them pronouns kind of exclusively. I didn't really realize I was non-binary. It's been a while. And it wasn't until my late teens, early 20s that I kind of had any kind of awareness about this aspect of my embodiment and who I was. But at that time, I was really connected with a lot of good friends who were trans and non-binary, and really credit them to kind of helping me cut through a lot of stuff that I think so many of the people in our community have to go through when we have to figure these things out alone and by ourselves. So I started off really resonating with they, them pronouns because that really resonated with this sense of who I was as a non-binary person. It really, I think Sydney captured it perfectly when they said it feels like a bed of clouds. To hear you're on cloud nine, it just feels really good in your body. It feels very euphoric and joyful when I hear they them pronouns, or at least it did. And over time, as I came to unpack a lot of stuff, a lot of cultural things that we encounter about what trans people are supposed to be, or what we can do, or what things we have to kind of perform. As I kind of start to unpack a lot of that, because we don't really escape it, I really kind of started to explore this more femme aspect of my embodiment, because this was something that, had always kind of been resonant there, but not really something followed up on. And as I kind of did more readings and engagement with other kind of trans women and non-binary women, gender queer women, gender expansive women, I think that really helped me kind of come into contact with that deeply resonating aspect of who I am, that embodiment I do have as a non-binary woman. And so she, they pronouns, they really create that sense of euphoric feeling, particularly when they're interchanged. I think in my case, they're not perfect because they don't capture the experience exactly. And I haven't really come across a neo-pronoun set that really resonates with me in the way that Sydney has. I've thought about playing around with she, here as a way to kind of capture that more neutral aspect. But that's still kind of a work in progress and something I'm still exploring right now. But I think that kind of captures some of the journey to like why I use she, they pronouns and how that kind of happened. And, it's an ongoing thing, an ongoing journey. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Janet. It was really nice to hear about your journey, finding your pronouns as well. And kind of that you're still on that journey, right? Recognizing that it really is like, as long as we're living, we're on that journey. We're finding our way and learning more about ourselves. And, it's fun kind of getting to discover more about ourselves. If you'll all indulge me, I did want to share just a little bit about my own kind of experience coming to use they, them pronouns exclusively. One thing I realized, I didn't actually start using the what's it called? Closed captioning effects. Are we able to enable them if they aren't already enabled? I'm not so familiar with making sure they're on. And so I just wanted to check, is it the live transcript what we're looking for?
I believe so.
There, thank you, Sydney. I'm going to enable them myself. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I apologize for interrupting the flow of conversation, but I know some people really enjoy having those, and I honestly like having subtitles on. It helps. So what I wanted to say about my own personal journey is somewhat similar to Janet, the timeline at least, and also about how it was very much meeting people, meeting other people who used they, them pronouns, who were non-binary or who were gender queer or gender fluid, that I started to be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, I think that's me. I think that's like me. I think I'm like you. I've always been very femme, and also very hairy. And that's been somewhat of a troublesome thing for other people, for whatever reasons, right? There's a lot of assumptions that people make, and then a lot of problems they have when I don't live up to them or others maybe don't live up to them. And so I always felt so uncomfortable with being he, himmed and being boyed and manned, and having all those expectations of what that meant and what that was supposed to do and mean or whatever, and how I was not like that naturally. And I didn't want to pretend that I was or live up to it or try to. I was always failing. And so as I started to kind of find my way into my teenage years, it was like, oh, I'm all this gay femme stuff, and kind of found identities that I was able to embody that didn't really address gender or didn't address my sex. It was more about my sexuality and about my attraction and my orientation. But I just always still felt sort of this misunderstanding in the community, in the gay community, being identified or identifying even, self-identifying at that time as a gay man, as a queer man. I still didn't feel right. There is still something unaddressed. And I've been saying this literally since I've been like in my later teens, that I feel like an old woman in this very hairy, handsome body. And I don't know why, but I just do. I feel very womanly. And I feel like this old woman who's been here hundreds of times, who's experiencing being treated like a hairy man, and feeling so confused because it makes no sense. And it's just not how, it's not my affinity. It's not how I associate. I feel very femme, and I feel very womanly. And those are words that have helped me express the phenomena of my life, or my personality, my experience. But I didn't necessarily want to be called a sister and treated like a woman and a girl, because it's like, but I'm not, like, I don't feel that. Personally, I just have a body, and I'm a very creative spirit. But I don't feel tied to a polarity. I don't feel tied to a position within a binary or a binary thinking. And I felt more an affinity to being around femmes and women than I literally felt, or really felt, as like, I'm a woman, or I'm non-binary. It's like, I have this like womanly energy is kind of the way I've described it before. But then I started to meet people who were more queer, gender queer, and gender fluid, and gender was more of a spectrum experience, or my friend who was non-binary. And meeting other people who are non-binary, and how, that itself was a very broad and diverse spectrum of experiences and expressions. And that's where I started to find myself, right? And meeting other trans people who were either trans women, trans men, or non-binary as well, or genderqueer, and getting to know how they identified, how they came to use pronouns, really affirmed that, I do use they, them pronouns to describe myself. That is the best word to describe my experience. Is a very neutral term that hopefully really challenges having expectations about what that means. So it really, for me, helps build a sense of being open to or receptive to who I really am, which is not tied up in a polarity of gender, of sex, and male and female. It's just like, that makes absolutely zero sense to me. You're talking babbly bool to me, like it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand it. I don't agree with it. I think it's woohoo, groupthink that people are just playing around with, haven't given up on yet. Personally, doesn't fit me. I live in what I love. My friend called it a gender void. That's the way my friend described their own experience of gender, a gender void, and I'm there with them happily. Love it. It's my cushy cloud of gender, right? It's a void. It's the absence, really. It's just, I love to wear what I wear. I love to dress how I dress. I love to do what I do. And for me, it is not at all tied really to gender or to sex or to my body or to my personality or my experiences. I'm just doing what I do. And so the non-binary identity and the description of my experience of gender being a void, and the pronouns they, them, just pronouns, all they are, nothing particular about who's not they, them. It's just a pronoun that I use too, that really helps me feel held in a way that I want to be held, which is lots of space to be who I am. And if I don't hear that, if I'm given a he, him, if I'm given a she, her, I feel really reduced. I don't feel there's actually the ability to be perceived and appreciated for who I really am, because I am non-binary, and that's what I am and who I am, and that's my experience. And that's kind of my, I feel like now I'm getting onto a soapbox. That's a whole nother conversation, but that's a bit my journey anyway, of really kind of trying it as I became familiar with it, and it felt right, sort of as Sydney and Janet said, like, of kind of like playing with it a bit, of like using it, seeing if it fits, and feeling good and being like, oh yeah, this feels good. And then as other people use it, it's like, oh yeah, that's who I am. And allowing to be that, right? That's, I think, a big part of it too, is that when people actually use my pronoun and I actually see me as non-binary with whatever that means to them, I feel so seen, I feel so held, I feel so affirmed. And so I know it's right. Like, there's absolutely zero doubt in my mind that these are my pronouns, this is my identity, and it is like a cloud with all the cushy stuff, my favorite stuffies, my woolies, my blankies, and my friends, all hanging out too, being like, woo, we're all cozy and having fun here on clouds, kind of thing. It's really powerful. So that's the journey there. And I think meeting other people who also are using pronouns in ways that are affirming to them, hearing both Sydney and Janet talk personally, that's affirming. And it really affirms for me, my pronouns and why I use the pronouns I do and why it's important. So I think I've taken up enough air time there in my little story. Thank you for listening. And if I remember correctly, I think what we'd like to do now is actually share a video So more than just our three of us and others in the room, there's so many people in this community who can speak to why pronouns are important to them, and what pronouns mean to them. So I think there's a short video we have to share to kind of build on that. And then we'll move to the kind of second part of the discussion before a question and answer. I need to remove my spotlight and mute myself.
Just because I may present more femme doesn't mean that I'm any less they, them.
You know what, that thing where you're eating a meal, but you're not really eating a meal, you're just kind of picking at food on the counter. My family and I were doing that one night, and I just kind of looked at them and said, hey guys, I'm non-binary. I don't have a gender.
In my opinion, gender is a universe. It is a broad spectrum of planets and stars and sky that truly cannot be contained into a binary.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and that's a non-negotiable. And they were all kind of like, okay.
I think one of the main reasons pronouns are so important is because other than our name, it's one of the main ways that people identify and call us.
My pronouns are personally very important to me. Growing up, enculturated into kind of a system that really subscribes to toxic masculinity, I was always uncomfortable with being called dude, what's up, man. I was so bad at dapping people up, like, how like guys like do that whole like that thing. I was so bad at that, and it just I felt very alienated every time someone would do that to me.
So when someone identifies with a pronoun, they're essentially taking their little piece of that broad universe and identifying with that. And so in using their correct pronouns, we're validating that, yes, you are right in your identity and you are important and we're respecting you.
Coming into terms with my gender queer identity has been one of the most challenging but also rewarding things that I've done.
Laverne Cox kind of famously said, misgendering a trans person is an act of violence. And it is. It's an act of psychological violence. It's a denial of somebody's personhood and a complete refusal to acknowledge their identity, whether intentional or not.
And so it is something that is entirely wrapped around our everyday lives. So just walking into a restaurant and hearing someone say she, will happen within 2 seconds of me entering, which doesn't happen about any of my other identities. They're not gonna be like, oh, you straight person, that doesn't happen. But automatically someone will make assumptions about gender, which translate into pronouns, which mean that I will hear over and over again people saying something about my identity which is false.
I think a lot of people associate expression with identity, and sometimes that's not the case. Oftentimes I'm in situations where I'm not the most safe being able to express my gender identity, and in those cases, even in those instances where I'm wearing basketball shorts or sneakers, you can't take my gender identity away from me because that's mine and not yours.
So many different options for who you are and how to define that. So when someone chooses a personal pronoun that they identify with, using that pronoun is a form of respect and a form of validation that, yes, this is your rightful identity and I will respect that.
And I know personally when I get misgendered, by strangers it's one thing, but it's especially painful when it's people who are close to you. So when my parents misgender me, it's a knife in my heart because they're the people whose opinions matter more to me than anybody else's.
And not knowing how to combat it. It is constant, and it is such a prevalent part of our society that being misgendered happens countless times in a day, and that builds up really quickly, and it can really be difficult for a person to hear over and over again because it invalidates your identity over and over and over again.
Pronouns are important because they are the smallest and easiest way that you can acknowledge somebody's identity.
And I also don't like that people call them their preferred pronouns because it's also not a preference. It's who they are. You need to use those pronouns. It's literally an extension of my arm or my leg. It's just as a part of me as a vital organ. My identity, although you can't see it, still needs to be validated just as much as you would validate the fact that I have 5 fingers or 5 toes.
Thank you, Sydney, for for playing that video and for kind of starting that part of that conversation around the importance of using pronouns. There I am. Thanks for letting me know, Janet. I wanted to actually take a moment just to ask Sydney or Janet, was there anything you wanted to add to this conversation around the importance of pronouns, or why pronouns are important?
Yeah, I think the video was great and encompassing a lot of these important points, and just really reiterating that this is not just something that trans people should be using, that cis people should be using pronouns as well. So, you know, I see a few folks have included your pronouns in your Zoom name. That's a really great way to do that, and is just like such an affirming way. You know, like I know whenever I log onto Zoom, I'm like, okay, who has their pronouns listed? Because to me, that's like, okay, this is a person who's like actually educated, who's like a safe person that I can kind of trust. And you know, when I first meet somebody, if they're introducing themselves with their pronouns, again, it's like, okay, this is a safe person. So like incorporating your pronouns, you know, including it on like your email signatures, your social media bios, after your name on Zoom or like other kind of virtual calls, when you introduce yourself, any place where you're using your name, you should be using your pronouns as well. That's just a sign that, you know, you have engaged in these types of education opportunities, that you're an ally, that you're part of the community, that you're wanting to be supportive to the trans community, regardless of whether you're part of the trans community or if you're an ally.
Thank you, Sydney. Janet, was there anything that you wanted to share onto that?
Oh yeah, I think there's a few things. I mean, one, I love the video that we show. I always think it captures a lot. There's not a lot to really add beyond the video because it really captures, you know, why pronouns are important. One, I think really two things I want to just emphasize on is that like pronouns are like, it's really about like a baseline of human respect and dignity, right? And that like using the correct pronouns doesn't lead to you getting like a pat on the back or praise. It's the baseline, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think the other thing is like, and maybe this is just because of my time back home, but like as parents, like my God, like if you have trans children or kids, like you got to do better around using the proper name and pronouns. It's vital for that. This saves lives, quite literally, just using the right name and the right pronoun. So that's kind of all I want to say about that to elaborate on. Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. Really appreciate that. And what I wanted to say about it, I'm just going to spotlight, getting better at the whole spotlight situation for the recordings, is that, you know, very much echoing what's been said, that the video is great. And I think, you know, it's really nice hearing from people why it's important and the importance that it holds for them. And I feel very similar, that when I hear my pronouns used, when other people are using pronouns, when I'm seeing people's pronouns, when pronouns are part of the conversation, you know, there's such a sense of I can breathe, right? I can have the conversation without having my guard up as much, you know, and when people correct themselves, if they've made a mistake, if people stop the conversation to check in, you know, those things really signal a sense of the value, the time that we take to make sure that we acknowledge the importance and honor that. And same about the betrayal, you know, like, oh, it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad when we're misgendered and when we're dead named and when we're just not spoken to correctly. Because that's the thing that I'm just like so confused by, is like, here's my name and my pronouns. Like, this is what you call me. Anything else is just wrong. Like, I'm not going to respond to it. It's not going to go well. It's wrong. It's just incorrect, right? And like, if we want to have communication, we have to communicate clearly and effectively and correctly, right? And I just think there's such an importance in recognizing that if there's anything that you're struggling with somebody telling you their names and their pronouns, and as Janet said, if there's that dynamic of you're a parent, you're a lover, you're somebody who's terribly close to someone who tells you, I need to update you with my name and my pronouns because this is what they are. That if there are things that come up for you, take care of those things. Go seek the professional help that's out there and go meet other people who may be struggling too, and take that stuff away from that person and deal with it and process it. And if you can't leave them alone and don't expect them to make room for you with the things you cannot and will not process, because it's just garbage. It's just garbage that's not ours. It's trash that needs to be taken out. It's a lot of things that can be processed in a way that you can hold on to the stuff that's good and let go of the stuff that's not. Right? Like, I just think it's so important to recognize that if we are a person who is loving someone, caring for someone, yeah, Janet, come contact us. If you need help, we got support. It's just so important, right? Because it's just so hard to have to go through that harm. It's so harmful, right? Like, just, it's so hard. And I've gone through it. I've seen my partner go through it. I've known my friends go through it. And it's just so hard. I mean, there's so much healing that has to happen. And I think that that's something that is a whole nother conversation, right? About how we do it and how we do it well. But just how important it is and how good it feels, right? When we are gendered right and when we're gendered correctly and our names are used. And especially like when it's used well, right? So for those who use mixed pronouns, to use them mixed, right? And for people who have perhaps their name is what they want to be called, not pronouns, it's using their name consistently, right? Those things just signal a sense of care and concern and compassion and solidarity and love, right? Like, it tells us that you like us and you love us because you want to treat us well and make sure we feel good. And hopefully we all do that for each other, because I think that that's a part of the conversation too on International Pronoun Day, is that all of us should have this opportunity to say what our pronouns are, to declare and not have it presumed of us, and to have our pronouns respected and our names respected. I find in my trainings, I often talk about that. I know that in sort of cisgendered heterosexual culture and circles, people often don't even know each other's names, and they don't ask and they don't try to necessarily learn them all the time. And we often just reduce each other down to pronouns and that's it. And I just think it's so important, right, to give everybody the chance of like, who are you really though? I don't want to assume anything of you. You know, what are your names? What are your pronouns? And what things do you love to do? And who are you? And hopefully that will really build such a better world beyond even just respecting pronouns, but just caring for each other stuff too. Anyway, again, I feel like I'm digressing, and I want to actually follow up. Sydney had sent me a message. You have something else that you wanted to share in regards to this part of the conversation.
Yeah, the video briefly addressed this, but it's super common that, you know, on forums or in conversations, somebody's like, what are your preferred pronouns? And again, that's not ideal because it's not a preference, it's who that person is. You know, it's who we are. So instead, what we like to use is, you know, just what pronouns do you use? You know, or my favorite thing is what pronouns honor you? What pronouns honor you? That just feels really affirming, especially when I get asked that or I see that on a forum and such. So there's like other ways to kind of ask these questions without implying that this is a preference, that, oh, like this is preferred but not necessary. Well, it is necessary, right? You know, as it has been said, like using somebody's chosen pronouns is a form of suicide prevention, and it is that who that person is, and it's important for all of us to validate and respect and affirm that.
Thank you, Sydney. And the one thing that we wanted to kind of close up the panel part on, and we'll touch on this briefly before yielding back for any questions that you may have, and also just to open, I think, the floor, if anyone wants to speak briefly to, you know, what they're feeling and thinking around pronouns themselves. I think it's really inspiring, right, hearing each other speak to that, and then a bit of an exercise. But I just wanted to yield back to Janet and then to Sydney, if you wanted to talk at all about the correcting, right? If there's been a mistake made, just what do people do, and also to just avoid making mistakes, because I think that's the most important thing, to do both that and so correcting ourselves, correcting others. If we just want to touch on that briefly before moving on.
I can talk on that. Sorry, my computer froze up there, so I probably looked a little strange for a minute. I probably was like, oh, what's happening? Yeah, so I think I can briefly just kind of quickly, I shouldn't say quickly, I can mention a few things to do when you make a mistake. I think the most obvious thing is if you make a mistake misgendering someone or using the wrong name, dead naming someone, is like immediately correct yourself. I think that's like a good baseline, is like an immediate correction and either just restating what you meant to say with the correct name or pronoun in place, or just a quick correction of, oh, meant to say they or meant to say she, something like that. I think the next like big tip I would give would be when you say sorry, do not make a big deal out of it. Do not turn it into like a theatrical journey where we as the trans person or the non-binary person have to now manage the space for you to unpack your emotions about how bad you feel about misgendering or dead naming us, while we on the inside are not feeling too good ourselves. So like when that mistake happens, you know, absolutely say sorry, correct yourself right away, but don't turn it into a huge thing where you're trying to seek forgiveness or be absolved for the mistake from the trans person or the non-binary individual. I think those two things are really important because I don't think people realize the amount of labor they're asking for their loved ones to constantly correct them or to point out when they're making the mistakes, because often that leads to a backlash for just even pointing out the mistake. So I think like those would be two key things on what to do. There's a third thing that came into my mind, but it kind of slipped away. So I will pass this on to Sydney, and if something comes back to me, I can add it back in.
Absolutely. I would say another big thing, you know, Janet addressed the majority of things, but I would say another big thing is that if somebody corrects you, especially if it was that trans person who, or that person who was just misgendered, thank them, because that is emotional labor and not everybody feels comfortable with correcting somebody who uses the wrong pronouns or wrong name. So if somebody corrects you, thank them, you correct yourself, and then you practice and work to do better so they don't have to keep correcting you, right? And just acknowledge that that took emotional labor and was a risk for them to correct you. And it's important for you to acknowledge that and thank them for it. You know, don't get upset or anything. You know, I've been in situations where I'll correct on a friend's behalf or something, and somebody's like, well, why did you interrupt the conversation? And I'm like, because it's more awkward to come back to it after. You know, you just messed up. So I'm like, they pronouns. And it's just much easier if you're just like, right, sorry, thank you, you know, correct yourself and move on. So if somebody's correcting you, just acknowledge them and thank them for that.
Thank you, Sydney. And the one last thing I kind of wanted to add to that too is just also the work that comes after. I think Jan, I've talked about this. Yeah, was that it? Yeah, okay. So do you mind if I touch on it and then you can fill in if I miss anything? Is that it's really important that we interrogate ourselves after the fact and say, what's going on here? Why am I not using the right names and right pronouns? I do know better. Why am I not doing better? And to practice, to take time like we are today, to think about it, to think about the person, to think about their pronouns, their name, to practice using it in a sentence, to write them a letter that you may never send, but you're practicing. It's really about building that association in our brains, right? Like our brains can learn, takes time, takes work, takes effort. And so it's building a really good groove that's automatic. So it's replacing whatever association you have with something better, deeper, and stronger. And so it takes work, right? And so it's just making sure that we recognize that if we've been corrected, if we've had to correct ourselves, that we're not just ending there, and also that we're not just coding, right, the language we use in ways that don't actually get to the way that we see, understand, and sort of receive people as they really are. I think that's so important too in this, right, is that hopefully if you're, you know, on this journey of thinking about pronouns, you're also thinking about sex and gender and the different ways that we are so coercively forced into roles and responsibilities and senses of being in the world underneath this very, you know, oppressive and violent system, and realize how much power we have, you know, to keep each other well, to care for each other through just using the right language, the correct name, the correct pronoun. So I think what I'd like to do is yield there. Unless Janet, is there anything you wanted to add to what I said? No, good. And Sydney, you had sent me a brief thing just about wanting to touch on something before we end the recording. So I'm going to yield to you. We'll stop the recording and then we'll open the floor for any questions or comments or anything.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll stop the recording shortly to talk a little bit more about practicing and do some examples here. But for those of you who may be watching this recording now, and for those of you who may want to go back to this or to the resources we're going to send to you folks, as we said, practicing with using somebody's pronouns is absolutely essential. So I'm going to share my screen here. And all of you folks who registered will be receiving this chart shortly after we finish up tonight. This is a little pronouns chart that we've developed. It is not comprehensive by any means. There are many, many pronouns, obviously, that are not included on this chart, but these are some of the basic pronouns. Of course, we have he, him, she, her, and then some neutral pronouns like they, them, and different neo-pronouns. And as we've addressed, neo-pronouns are those that don't fall within the categories of he, she, or they. So this is a great chart you can kind of refer to get a sense of, like in what context different pronouns would be used. There's lots of these types of resources floating around on the internet. And we also have this great website here. This is what I use to practice with my own pronouns. So you can select different pronouns here, and it automatically puts the information in there. Or you can type in your own. If there's a pronoun on here that is not included, for example, fey, fair, you can type that in: subject, object, possessive, adjective, possessive pronoun. And what they do in this website when you type it in is essentially they will give you a sentence, and you have to type in what pronoun it is that you think works. And then you do check answers after that. This is a great resource that you can use to practice with pronouns. Again, as we've addressed, practicing with pronouns is absolutely essential. Both of these are great things that you can do. So we definitely encourage you to utilize these resources and any other ones that you might find.
Well, thank you so much, Sydney. I'm going to now officially and formally end the recording.